All right, well, thank you. I know today we really had this opportunity. I know we had to reschedule Peter before some internal conflicts, and I know we wanted to talk a little bit more about Spin Global. Some of you that don't really know what some of the things that we've been doing, who we are, and um, really have an opportunity. In particular, today we're going to talk about building resilience through private-public partnerships and some of the work that we're doing here shaping the P3 world. I'm going to turn it over first here to Joel for a few introductions, and then I'll get us started in a little background.
Yeah, it's good to be with you all. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're located. Joel Thomas, CEO of Spin Global. Camila is going to do a little bit of an intro to us, and I'll jump in and talk about some of the P3 work we're doing. So just glad to be here with you all and look forward to our discussion.
Wonderful. And yeah, my name is Camila Tapias, and I'm a global disaster resilience specialist at Spin Global, and also the communications director here with the Arise US board. So a little bit about us. Spin Global, we are a public benefit company, and our mission is to disrupt disasters from neighborhoods to nations. So in particular, we really focus on this understanding of that disasters destroy people's lives and livelihoods. What really makes that disaster is that relationship between natural and man-made hazards combined with that human, social, and also economic vulnerability. So we really exist to interrupt some of the systemic cycles of destruction, also by creating some of these innovative solutions that always put people first in the process and reduce risk and increase this whole community resilience through partnerships, as we'll continue to talk about today. So we really are motivated by compassion and also incorporating some of these innovative approaches in our work. A little bit about our vision and our core values. We are a team motivated, as I mentioned, by compassion, creating value for our clients and humanity in general, and working together for a higher purpose, really mission driven, and here really focus on stewarding people, planet, and profit. And at the end of the day, really aspiring to make a difference, a lasting difference in everything that we do here. At Spin Global, we have four key main pillars. First one, strategic planning. As you see here, the S, each of the letters were spin. So strategic planning, providing disaster management expertise and decision support solutions. Our second partnership will be really focused on our discussion today, prioritizing that inclusion of private and public sectors, and also traditionally underrepresented groups, really focus on this equity piece and making sure that our work is equitable and having this whole community approach. And the I for impact and innovation, combining operations, research, and also technology with science and data. And also, as we mentioned this, we call it last mile user needs. We have two technology platforms. One is called Planet Ready, and the other one is Responder CQ, when we provide training exercises right now. And also in Planet Ready, we provide I'm also translating a lot of these exercises to Spanish, and having that opportunity to reach more people there, and also Responder CQ for different assessment for organizations. So you can check our website and learn a little bit more about that. And then really big, our focus on neighborhoods and nations. Our solutions really focus on the environment at any scale. And Joel will continue to talk about this more from really families, local level, in going from national assessment, that neighborhoods to nations approach, federal and state, and also not only in the US, but having this global approach. And here are some of our capabilities. We really talk about our disrupt capabilities. As I mentioned, our mission is to disrupt disasters from neighborhoods to nations. So here we have the first D, stands for data-driven assessments before, during, and after disasters. Also, it's providing institutional capacity building and regional security cooperation, as well as strategic consulting and program development services, program management, service based on some of our clients and partners. We also had the ability, and we provided rapid response and recovery support. And also, which one is the next one, really tied to Arise, and also our involvement with the UNDRR and a vision for universal risk reduction, resilience, and emergency management services. P stands for pre-disaster planning for all hazards and incident types. And as I briefly mentioned last one, with training and exercises to prepare neighborhoods and nations. So just a little bit of overview from some of our capabilities. We'll provide some more information so you can check our website and here learn more some of these capabilities. But now I'm going to turn it over to Joel, who's going to really unpack some of our P3's work.
Thank you, Camila. So, it's been a passion of mine for years prior to starting Spin Global 8 years ago, to look at how do we engage the private sector, before, during, after disasters. For me, it started as a volunteer. I remember being in a lot of places, but for example, Thailand after the tsunamis, and Sudan with refugees, and looking at, the thousands of volunteers that showed up. And I was one of those volunteers, and looking at the innovation, the passion, the energy, but looking at, like, okay, a lot of people that I admired and respected were burnout and overwhelmed, under-resourced, and in some cases disillusioned, and sort of left that path. And so I was like, well, how do we take, the resources and capacities and capabilities of national governments, big institutions, organizations, and combine it with the passion, energy, and skills of sort of the, individual, family, volunteer, private approach. And so for me, that started a long time ago, this journey of from a operational standpoint, an academic standpoint, and a technology standpoint, looking at how do we do more with engaging the private sector deliberately. Not, I think a lot of expectation is on government to deliver in the context of disasters, and it's not right sized. We do a lot of work. We've been in over 30 countries in the last several years, do a lot of work at national levels, and see that, where we live in the United States, we got tons of resources, we can print money. Lots of countries, that's not even an option. And so how do we leverage what already exists, the existing capabilities and capacities of the private sector? I know I'm preaching to the crowd here, but just giving you guys a little bit of my journey. And that's led to, really, the last few years, I think, some substantial work that I think for us, we're really excited about, and I think represent important contributions to the industry, looking at evolving this idea, doctrine, and policy and guidance in the United States in particular, and also globally, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, and actually translating that into capabilities that are being built, and actually funded programs at national level, state, local level, that are working with the private sector, and then also working with the private sector to provide guidance about how to better interact with the government as well. So we've actually contributed to authoring a number of foundational guides. The one in the center there is Building Private-Public Partnerships. It was published last year by FEMA. It's actually the single most downloaded piece of guidance that FEMA's ever published. So I encourage you to go get it. We can put a link in the, I didn't ask you to do this in advance, Camila, sorry, but if we can get a link, we could throw it in the chat for those who are interested in it. It really covers sort of a little bit of the gamut of how to do this, specifically focused on the challenges of, building resilience through cooperation between private and public sectors, and looking at that sort of before, during, and after disasters. And again, with an emergency management sort of flair here, FEMA is the client. I know it's a little bit different than some of the folks on this call, how you typically engage, but that's sort of the point of entry for these documents. And there's another one on restoration recovery. There's some fact sheets on how do we, Camila talked about equitable outcomes, how do we achieve equitable outcomes for risk reduction, building on sort of the administration's executive orders to focus on increasing equity, and then also looking at how do we reduce risk and build resilience. And so there's a number of pieces of guidance that have been published just in the last 2 years that I think are foundational. They represent first evers in at least the US context, and in the sort of Homeland Security emergency management industries. Next slide, please. There's more to come. There's a whole compendium of things that are being built. There's 3 new sort of sub guides. The Building Private-Public Partnerships is sort of the master. There's several sort of sub guides that are being built additionally. They'll be released this year. We're actually getting ready for national engagement. There's an opportunity for this network to get involved in actually reviewing and providing feedback, specifically on the top 2. Information sharing. How do we do information sharing? A huge topic. It's cross-cutting. How do we do better? There's a whole guide that we've been able to have the chance to sort of lead and author and coalesce and convene stakeholders across the nation to provide input and develop standardized guidance, a starting point for how do we do information sharing better, and another guide on economic resilience through private-public partnerships, connecting the dots between emergency management, economic development, different industries, which is sort of outside the lane of how traditionally that's been done, engaging insurance industry, engaging, all the different players that have a piece in economic resilience. And then last one that's under development right now and is scheduled for later this year. Those first two are going to be out for national engagement like in the next few weeks. The last one in a few months this summer, likely. It's called a Business Emergency Operations Center Guide. So this idea and notion of this concept of a Business Emergency Operations Center is something that emerged around 2005 in the wake of Hurricanes Rita and Katrina. In the U.S. approach, you had private sector liaisons that are codified through National Incident Management System, but actually, Louisiana actually built a BEOC, and then, Illinois and North Carolina and FEMA, they built these, and it's really a focal point for coordination between private and public sectors. And so there's increased interest in the U.S. in how do we do better in engaging the private sector in a more deliberate way, particularly in the response and recovery sort of parts of the disaster emergency management life cycle. And so this guide focuses on that. It's really a battle book for how to do that. And so a lot of stuff coming forward this year. So this is an area where we're involved in all of these. We're helping to shape all these and excited to be have an opportunity for this network to contribute. Next slide, please. When we look at sort of the next tier, I talked about doctrine, policy, guidance. Okay, great. So how do I actually do some of this stuff? We were also wanted to share, these are some publicly available courses. We've got other things we're working on, but these are publicly available free of charge that people in the Arise Network could take advantage of. They're all certified courses. One's on whole community inclusive economic recovery. A whole segment of that, a huge segment of that is on P3s and how to engage the whole community in economic recovery. The next one is logistics and supply chain resilience. And the last one that just got released literally this month, and there's 4 upcoming course opportunities to participate in. It's called Managing Public, Private, and NGO Partnerships to Prepare for and Solve Critical Logistics and Supply Chain Challenges During Large-Scale Disasters. It's a mouthful. Supply chain, disaster response, P3s, first ever of this course. It's a management level course. So there's performance level courses, then there's management level courses. The one on the left is a performance course. The one on the right is a management level course. So they get increased complexity and the way it's interact. It's a really suited for executives and business leaders and government leaders to talk together. The one on the right, and the one on the left is a little bit more sort of middle management or below. Sort of foundational teaching and doctrine and approaches. So we've got courses that are available, trying to evolve the practice here, evolve the clarity around what the heck does it mean to get the private and public sector to work together in emergency management, or more broadly in the context of disaster management, crisis management, whatever you want to call it. Next slide, please. And then, this is an area where globally, I'm not able to put everything on here that I'd like to, but we're involved in a number of nations, including Ukraine, which is on the screen. It's publicly available information. So doing national level assessments, actually advising Ukraine on developing a national framework for engaging the private sector. And so this is a wartime resilience effort looking at where they're at. And so we're working with really a number of countries in the Black Sea region right now doing that work, and very much all of them are interested in how do we engage the private sector more deliberately in the context of risk reduction, in the context of resilience, and certainly in response to recovery, moving from just an American Red Cross focused response to recovery to a whole society. How do we engage business and industry? What in the U.S. we call community lifeline owners and operators of power, water, communications, transportation, to what NATO calls resilience baselines, same stuff. So we're actually involved in developing national frameworks, and I'm advising NATO on developing a sort of P3 national framework for the alliance. And so with that, we're doing a lot of institutional capacity building, which amounts to training and exercise type work, and helping sort of with the framework implementation, the coursework implementation, but also actually doing like functional training and exercise, preparatory work to actually, even before training exercise, just understanding risk and vulnerability, starting really there. A lot of our work all starts there. It's all understanding risk and vulnerability, and that's how we even get to the, individuals and whole society approach with the private sector. So, anyways, that's our sort of global approach. Some notes there, and then next slide. Really, we wanted to show up today to sort of share a little bit about what we're doing. We've been part of Verizon Network in the U.S. For a long time. Camilla's been on the board for a while now, and wanted to really connect the dots on some things here that we've been working on in our company and supporting clients around the world and in the U.S. And really wanted to make sure that the Verizon Network is aware of a couple of opportunities. Like I mentioned, there's a couple of guides, the information sharing and the economic resilience guide for P3s that's coming out in the next month. Camilla will send it to the network. There's an opportunity for public comment and review. Like, if you like it, send us what worked. If you didn't like it, tell us why you don't like it, and here's what you need to do to make it better. That's the whole point, is to get feedback to make this something that reflects the whole community and that is broadly applicable as possible. So, it's all sort of creating broad basis from which to operate, and then let people sort of iterate and make it their own, not providing a prescriptive approach, but more of a guidance oriented approach. So everything we're doing there is in the context of sort of guidance. Participate in the course deliveries. Camilla or Alexa, if you want to put in the information on the courses that are coming up, the managing P3s, supply chain management for disasters course that is FEMA certified. Those are coming up. There's some opportunities, and actually, shameless plug, Camilla will be teaching one of them, which I don't think is on the sign up list yet, but it's in May. If you're in Texas by any chance, you ought to connect with Camilla. You can actually be part of her class in person coming up. And then another thing, just in general, we're involved in a lot of shaping efforts. And if you have stories and best practices from companies, from industry groups, from governments, people and non-governmental organizations that are doing P3s well, like looking at, this broader lens of not just, building infrastructure, which is part of it, but really looking at sort of planning and operational coordination. That's sort of the focal point here, is how do we better plan and coordinate and work together to get systems aligned and working toward the same end. If you have examples or best practices you want to share, please do send them in. Some of that stuff, we continue to build knowledge base and feature stories in the work. I think sometimes stories are the most powerful way to convey meaning and give people an idea of how they might apply something they're reading about in real life, in their business or in industry or government agency at the state, local, federal, national level, whatever it might be. So those are some opportunities to participate. I think there's one more slide. Yeah, so I think that's what we sort of wanted to share today. Just sort of bring awareness to the Arise network of some of these efforts that I think are significant, not just for us, but I think for P3 efforts writ large, for the U.S., I think for the world, for the NATO alliance, and certainly welcome any questions or comments at this time.
Joel, that's terrific. Thank you very much. We are trying to maximize collaboration opportunities within the network. If you want to send me a short description of each of those 3 opportunities, I will circulate those around. And we're already finding takers for these collaboration opportunities. And they can be anything from as broad as one company wants help with finding a watershed management specialist to work in Haiti, down to another Arise member wants help in finding sponsors for a prize that they want to offer. So send me a description of those 3 items and we'll get them circulated around, and you will probably get takers based on previous experience. So that'd be great. And likewise, if you want us to coordinate comments on any of those documents, we're happy to help you do that, or we can just route the comments straight back through to you, whichever you want. And Camilla, you and I, obviously we can discuss on a day-to-day basis how that would work, but those are there. And they really want to, I'd love to help you publicize them.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Second point I want to make is Deborah is talking with Department of Defense on a project called Apex, which is based on civilian uses of non-classified military data for a whole bunch of different use cases, of which disaster risk reduction is one. Given the work you were doing with NATO, for example, there would seem to be an instant tie-up there, and you should probably have that conversation with Deborah. I noticed she's just dropped. Oh no, Deborah, you're there. Sorry, I beg your pardon. That would be another potential area of tie-up as well, because the work we're doing, the project's called Apex, MCDC. I don't know what that stands for, but the project is called Apex, and it's literally just getting underway right now. So you might very well want to have a conversation with Deborah about that.
Yep. I'd love to, Joel. I think the work with NATO crosses over very well with what we're attempting to do. So we'll have to arrange something.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Thank you.
You had your hand raised?
Yeah, without wasting too much of everyone's time, I think a clarifying comment would be useful at this point, just so we all are on the same playing field. The term public-private partnerships is used in a lot of different ways. What for some are true public-private partnerships are contracts, financial vehicles. For others, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which does an annual public-private partnership for resilience conference, they take a more expansive approach to all kinds of public-private collaborations. And I've done some writing on the distinction. I've been on the UNDRR, UN Commission for International Trade and Law expert group on public-private partnerships. I've presented on public-private partnerships to the World Bank. So without going into my usual hour-long stump speech on this, I just wanted to make people aware that they need to be careful when they're talking about public-private partnerships, because not everyone means the same thing.
That's a great point, Ira. And I offered in the meeting chat a definition that we use that is published in the foundational guide. The first one that was published by FEMA. P3 is any type of mutually beneficial cooperative arrangement, informal or formal, between two or more organizations of private industry and the public sector to enhance life safety, economic security, and resilience of jurisdictions. So that's the definition that is in at least the U.S. government FEMA doctrine guidance that we're basing everything that we talked about on. Understanding, recognizing, everything you said, because I think there are other uses of public-private, mostly in the context of infrastructure, contracts type things like that. And so that's actually one of the distinctions for why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has their annual building private-public partnerships, to sort of distinguish. There's a few reasons why, recognizing the centrality of the role of the private sector, and that they own 85% of the infrastructure and things that we're trying to either make more resilient, protect, whatever, but also those three emphasis points at the end, life safety, economic security, resilience of jurisdictions, broadens the aperture specifically. And I think it's much more tuned to, at least in what the U.S. Narrative, I think has become a focal point.
Well, thank you for confirming that there are lots of different variations of public-private partnerships. What you're talking about in my language is public-private collaborations. And for those who want to go further on this, not only with the organizations that I mentioned, the UNECE has developed a template for so-called people-first public-private partnerships, which are intended specifically to advance resilience and sustainability. So FEMA has its own uses of language, but it's far from universal.
Right. Bobby, you got your hand raised.
Yes, I really appreciated what you shared. I'm interested. You mentioned that public-private partnerships have been more used on suppression of the problem than prevention in anticipation of the problem, more in the emergency response structuring. And I'm interested in two things that were raised. One is this whole society response. I think there seems to be a subset of public-private partnerships that are narrowly large institution only, not massively multi-stakeholder in structure. And this question of, is there a public-private partnership gap in regards to prevention, and is that gap also in terms of how multi-sided is the participation architecture for the public-private partnership? For example, I think that there's lots of social innovation in society that never makes it into public-private partnerships because a lot of the public-private partnerships are structured rather narrowly and rigidly. So how do we create a structure that is compatible with the social innovations we have, the whole society participation, and the prevention objective?
Yeah, my response to that would be I'd encourage you to read what has been published. It does expand to address the points you've raised, to look at whole society, NGOs, small businesses, industry associations, literally media. I mean, you go through the list. There's actually a list of here's the type of players we're talking about, where, and I think in some of the traditional P3s, it's those big, big muscle groups, right? And so it certainly includes and is not mutually exclusive with the idea of, the big organizations, and in the cases, especially when you're looking at, energy sector and, sectors that, but there's also cooperatives, right? So, I do think that the framework, I've read all the UNECE stuff. We did a lot of research for a few years on this, and I would argue, I think this is one of the most expansive definitions that I've seen, but it certainly would welcome professional banter. We actually, a couple years ago, put out the definition of P3s to the Arise network. And actually, I believe at the time, Peter, I can't remember if you were the president or not, but at the time, I think it was one of the most hotly responded to topics in the network. I mean, there was a ton of feedback, and actually it was fantastic. So this network actually had an opportunity to contribute to the definition, and I think was an important piece of informing the definition that's in the P3 guide that is published by FEMA, which I do think takes a whole society approach if you study it carefully, as compared to other definitions that are conventionally available. Having said that, yeah, no definition is perfect. No definition is exactly perfect, and there's different purposes and functions and sub-functions within, depending whatever you're trying to do. So certainly through the lens of, I think, resilience, I think is the main focus, and I think the risk reduction component fits neatly into that. There's actually a lot of talk in all the guides and courses very much on resilience and risk reduction, beyond just, I think, what the traditional, quote, emergency management community is focused on whacking moles. It started with engaging the private sector, started with response in emergency management, bar none. It was all about, get me commodities, resources, help me respond right now. Give me a contract, pre-disaster contract to go, move mountains, right? One of the reasons this guidance was created was to expand the purview and say, hey, look, like, this needs to be a life cycle approach. We need to start way before, and follow through all the way to, in some cases, restoration, reconstruction, whatever it might be. So having said that, I wonderful comments, and truly it would be wonderful to have sidebar conversations as this continues to evolve. This is a burgeoning thing that I think, like resilience many years ago, there's 100 definitions, and I think there's fewer more widely agreed upon things. Well, it depends, you might not feel that way, but I've done a lot of resilience research as well, and I think these things get clarity over time, and there's also recognition that there's different needs for different aperture depending on the domain you're engaging. So anyways, all that to say,
I think that's terrific what you just shared. Just the 5-second addition would be, if all the public-private partnerships that are currently already established could be approached to shift so that they could embrace these values that your current definition or the FEMA document you alluded to sounds like it embraces at least a subset of, or it goes in that direction. So, if we could upgrade the current, because I think on the ground, at least West Coast United States, a lot of the public-private partnerships are not structured yet to reflect those values. But maybe that's a gap that could be addressed by Arise, or more globally, more generally.
I think that's actually a great point, Peter, as a follow-up, because things take time. Like I look at this as long range. We're trying to affect change over the course of 5 and 10 years. Not, I mean, some of this guys was just published a year ago, which was yesterday, right? In the current terms of like changing organizational change theory. So yeah, like, I totally appreciate and recognize that, like, most P3s, even in emergency management, who this doctrine was, policy guidance, everything was set in place for, are still just learning. And that's why courses and training and all this other stuff is necessary to sort of, advance. And I think there'll probably be, these things are living documents, and they may be updates and lessons learned and, and adaptations moving forward. With that, I do think that's an area where Arise and the UN platform, there's an opportunity to partner and actually convene conversations around that, standardization of some of what we're talking about, so yeah, great thought. I love that.
I remember attending, it says how far the subject has come. I remember attending an Arise global meeting, and Dale, I think you were at it as well, where it was in Geneva, I think, and the subject of public-private partnerships had clearly just come over the horizon as far as UN ISDR, as it then was concerned. And in the cocktail gathering after the meeting, the three initials PPP were on every set of lips around that room. And I stood to one side of I happened to be at one side of the room at one point, and all I could hear was PPP, 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 PPP. It sounded just like a flock of birds in a tree. And nobody knew what it meant, but they loved the sound of it. Now what we're engaged in doing is actually filling out what that should actually mean, and what that might most usefully actually mean in the context of disaster risk reduction. And Joel, I absolutely commend you for the stuff you've done. Where Bobby's coming from, we're creating with his organization, Bobby and Brenner, who's also on the phone, a wildfire community resilience toolkit. And one of the things that we absolutely want to include, I would think, and I'm putting words in their mouths, is, well, how to partner with industries in your area. Not least because their wildfire resilience probably depends on things that you might be doing, and vice versa. So how to build those partnerships in the context of wildfires becomes, a very big deal. In the fullness of time, when we're doing stuff on flooding or earthquakes or whatever, pick your disaster, the same subjects will apply. They'll have slightly different flavor, slightly different examples, but it'll be fundamentally the same issue. So if we can come up with some sort of defined policy position on how this would work, it would be absolutely marvelous. And Joel, if you wanted to, step one is, let's get the comments on your document. Let's act as a conduit to get comments on those documents, right? If you want to work further on that going forward, be delighted to figure out what that might look like and how we can get it going.
Yeah, certainly. To me, this is an area that requires continued development, and the more we can collaborate on this, I'm all for it. So let's do it.
Terrific.
You really got to have a menu of metrics to reinforce the behavior that you want to achieve. And that's where sometimes the metrics don't really support the partnership.
Right. So yeah, so what would an effective set of metrics look like? How would you know when you got the right metrics? And that's a question that you've got to enable some person in a community who may never have done this before to answer. It's easy for you and I. We've been consulting for 30, 40 years, right? You've got to enable somebody who's coming to this brand new. This was never part of their job before. How do you help them figure out what a good set of metrics looks like? And that's that would be an important part of it.
One thing we know for sure is that the amount of initiatives and efforts that are put in that bucket for PPPs, for instance, so in the preventative bucket is 2%. It's only 2%. And so we've got a long way to go.
Right. We need to move on, I think, but does anybody have any final comments? That was a truly excellent presentation, and I will be recommending when I send a minute out that people take time to listen to it. Does anybody have any final comments? All right, well, Joel, let's see what we can get, no pun intended, spun up on this subject, right? Very cool. So Joel and Camilla, thank you.